What's up, Pine Logical? I hope everybody's having a fantastic Wednesday. For those who don't know me, my name is Gabriel Baker. For those who do know me, thank you for coming in and viewing my videos. Even if you don't know me, thank you for coming in and viewing my videos. I always appreciate anybody who comes in and takes the time out of their day to be able to have these conversations that we're having, even though that I'm pretty much talking and you're listening. But I'm sure you're having a conversation in your head while we're thinking about these things anyway. So today we are going to talk about narcissism and ego. This is a very gritty subject. This is a lot of stuff that I really had to internalize for myself. And just because I label off some of these things, that I label off anything that really, any of the information that I have, does not mean that I'm labeling you narcissistic or egotistical. Everybody has these traits. Even if people don't want to think that they don't, they do. And it's just having to find your own discernment about how some of this stuff might apply to you. So make sure that you keep that in mind throughout most of this video, that I'm not labeling anybody. If anything, I'm going to use myself as an example and a lot, because I've had to really internalize a lot of this stuff, like I said, about how I'm doing some of these things and how I'm not doing some of these things. And there is a balance that you can actually have when it comes to this. I do believe that there are some things that you can actually have a balance for when it comes to some of these traits, habits, signs, all of these things that you can actually have to build yourself up, because some of these things are necessary, but it depends on the person. It depends on people's situations. It depends on what people go through, because people experience different traumas in a very different way than most other people do. A lot of people, like I said, they go through the same things, just in different variables. I say that all the time because people do really kind of go through the same thing on a fine line, but it depends on what it is. So, narcissism and ego. We're going to start with narcissism first. Narcissism is an excessive interest in or admiration of oneself and one's physical appearance. To kind of continue off of that, like I said, there are some points of the time where people should be able to look at themselves in admiration, not where they're constantly putting themselves on the highest pedestal that they can possibly put it on, and everybody is just the lowest of peons. No, that's not acceptable for me. But being able to make sure that you can still have admiration for oneself and be able to make sure that you can know that other people can put themselves up like that too, it's an even playing field. That's where I think that needs to draw the line at. So, some habits of narcissism: inflated ego, lack of empathy, need for attention, repressed insecurities or few boundaries, sense of entitlement, exploits others without guilt or shame, frequently demeans, intimidates, bullies, or belittles others, fixation with appearance of themselves, fear of abandonment, needing control, and manipulation. Mostly emotional, but causes confusion, low self-esteem, anxiety, shame, and guilt in one or others. So when like I said, since I'm going to use myself as an example, I don't really have that. I view myself anyway of not really having that much of an inflated ego, but I feel like it depends on the situation of what it could be. I have great empathy when it comes to others. I understand a lot. I'm not going to be able to understand everything, especially if I can't always relate, but I feel like having empathy is always something that people do need. People do understand. Even with this saying about how a narcissist might have a lack of empathy, people do understand if they understand. If they relate to that, they're going to understand. If they don't, they don't. But I feel like it is always important to try to understand from how other people are experiencing it compared to how I'm experiencing it, especially if I have never gone through that experience. The need for attention. Everybody kind of has that sense of where they always want a need for attention. Myself, I feel like it's like when it comes to the point of even how I do YouTube, for example, TikToks, anything like that. Everybody kind of has that need of intention of trying to be in the spotlight. So I don't really think that it comes to the point to where there's always a bad thing, but it always definitely is not always a good thing if you constantly think that you need to be the center of attention. Then constantly think that people need to text you because you were the best or anything like that. That's the inflated ego. Repressed insecurities. Everybody's got repressed insecurities. I got repressed insecurities that I'm not going to tell, that sometimes I won't tell anybody about, but everybody has insecurities. I probably couldn't really think of it off the top of my head right now because I'm just trying to make sure I do this video of what my insecurities would be, but I do know definitely some of them. Few boundaries. That's something that I've had to learn when it comes to having to set boundaries for yourself and for others. Sometimes you also got to think about it as a boundary of not where you're always trying to protect yourself, but sometimes you need to set those boundaries so you can protect other people. Sometimes there are things where you are putting on so much stuff about when it comes to people that you need to be able to have boundaries. Some people don't have boundaries. Some people are okay with just not having any boundaries at all, talking about or telling anything about how they feel and what they feel about. But sometimes people kind of do need to be able to notice those things. Sense of entitlement. For myself, I wouldn't really think I'm that entitled, but it really just depends. It might depend on maybe like some of your skills that you're good at, if you might have a sense of entitlement about it. Exploits others without guilt or shame. Everybody talks shit. Everybody has a way of they're trying to exploit of what other people think about how they feel, what they're going through, and all these other things without guilt or shame. People talk shit all the time. You really just have to come to the point to where you need to know when you should do it and when you shouldn't do it. And I mean, you probably shouldn't be talking shit really at all, because nobody, especially myself, nobody's in that position where they need to judge or talk shit just because they want to. And frequently demeans, intimidates, bullies or belittles others. I don't really see myself like that. I don't really like to be able to demean people or make them feel lower than me. I mean, some people might just feel intimidated by you just because of how you talk, how you present yourself. That's just intimidates really is a fine gray line of what that actually might entail for myself or even for yourself. Bullying and belittles, I mean, people have gone through that stuff. I don't feel like that's necessary to be able to have to judge anybody for that stuff, for what they do, what they look like. And fixation on appearance. When I was never really fixated on my appearance really at most of the times, like you should be able to still look at yourself like that. You should still be able to have a good fixation on your appearance, but not think that like I'm the golden child. I'm the one that needs to make sure that I'm presenting myself in the best possible way. I don't believe that. Negative control or needing control. I'm a control freak in a lot ways more than one. I mean, I've had to really make sure that I could know what I can and what I can't control. And mostly what I know that I can control is really just what I can control for myself. What I tell people, what I talk to people about. Being able to know that I can't control other people for what they do, what their decisions are, or what they're based on. Needing control to be able to control everything, it's a bad habit that I've had to really make sure that I could control. Controlling the needing to control, and that's hard for me. It really has been really hard for me to do that sometimes. In fear of abandonment, people don't really want to lose other people, especially if they're in that point of where they just don't want to lose them because they care about them. People fear abandonment all the time. People fear a lot of stuff, and abandonment is definitely one of those things that is really hard for people to not want to abandon. But sometimes, if it happens, you just gotta let it go. You gotta let the universe take your course and just continue on. It's the best that you can do. I've had my sense of abandonment with a lot of people. Definitely a lot of people that have come and go into my life, a lot of things. So I mean, everybody has that fear. And then manipulation, mostly control, mostly emotional, causes confusion, low self-esteem, anxiety, shame, and guilt of oneself or one others. I mean, manipulation, it's just, some people don't really realize that they're manipulating. Some people don't really realize that they're actually doing these things. And I think that's just really comes to the point to where you use that for your own discernment about how you're being able to manipulate stuff. Manipulation is kind of the same thing as needing control, of constantly feel like you need to control people. You need to control about how they're feeling. And it's just like, it causes the confusion, low self-esteem, anxiety, shame, and guilt. It causes that stuff. And I feel when it came to me, being able to make sure that I could know that I don't need to be able to manipulate everything in my favor. I don't need to manipulate of people needing to like me. I don't need to manipulate people into thinking that they need to be next to me. Like, that's not something that I really tried to do. But I'm sure that there's probably been multiple times in my life where I have tried to do that. I'm sure there's like that for a lot of people. And the root cause for most of narcissism is just environment, parent-child relationships, too much adoration or too much criticism, genetics. Some of these things can be personality traits that you get from your parents. And I think it's not really to the point to where it's always genetics, because most of it's usually just what you see as a child. Most of it's usually just like how you see your parents react, as that's usually how you think that you need to react. And it's just really just a point of what you absorb in your entire environment, or what you've been around for most of your entire life. That was something. Ego or egotistical. Only seem confident, but act as a thin veil of insecurity. Excessively conceited or absorbed in oneself or self-centered. An egotistical person views themselves the first and last priority in life. Consider the most important thing in life, thus wanting others to believe the same. Also, this belief of them makes them impolite to others. You know, when it comes to myself, that being able to consider yourself first and last priority, I mean in the point of making sure that you can always seem like be happy with yourself, give yourself that self-love you need. You do need to put that as a priority for yourself. You are always the first person that wakes up in the day, and you're always the person that goes to bed at the end of the night. It's always you. You are always there. So, I feel like you need to be able to have that healthy balance of being able to make sure you can put yourself first and last. But you also need to make sure that not all the time that you are always the priority. Not because that you are going through things that people aren't also going through some of these things too. People are going through things just as much as you are. So you can't always put yourself to where in a conversation when somebody's trying to vent to you that you need to compare, oh, this reminds me of this. Oh, this reminds me of when I did that or something like that. You can't do that. Some people only want you to do is just listen. And that's something I really had to make sure that I can use for myself. Being able to make sure that I can listen when somebody wants me to and not have to think that I need to compare. An ego is born out of fear and isolation. People don't understand about how much it is scary sometimes to be able to have to, go through some of these things sometimes. Have to go through the sense of isolation to where, you're always by yourself, and it isolates yourself to where you're only thinking about yourself at all times. That's where the first and last priority come in. But, it's just being able to find that balance. A narcissist is egotistical, but they also seek validation, admiration, and are highly sensitive to feedback and criticism, and lack the capacity for reciprocal relationships as well as the ability to self-reflect. I never used to be able to take criticism as a child lightly, ever. I always just thought it was to a point where it just they're making me feel bad and out of this stuff. There is a point to where there is constructive criticism of where they're not making sure that you feel bad, but you at least know that there are some things that you could fix. It's hard to be able to say that in a conversation about how you want to be able to give them constructive criticism. Most of the time, they really just got to understand that for themselves about how they want to be able to make sure that they can do that, about how they can understand that being able to take feedback and criticism is not always somebody just speaking hate to you at all times, and being able to make sure that you can reciprocate that to people who you are talking to, that you can also give others feedback and constructive criticism and not just brash harshness. That being able to have that ability is a pretty great ability, honestly. And the ability to self-reflect, that just goes for people who want to do that at their own pace. Not everybody can find the way of being able to know that they can look at themselves and understand that they can reflect on the things that they are being taught, the things that are being shown, the things that they know that they have done wrong, and make sure that they can turn it into a good thing for themselves or the person that they care about, their significant other, their friends, their family. Being able to self-reflect is a hard ability to be able to master. It takes most of our lifetime to be able to make sure that we can master the ability of self-reflection. Traits and signs of egotistical: near constant tendency to be self-referential, an inability to commit to anything that doesn't serve their interests, an exaggerated view of their abilities, a lack of personal accountability, difficulty emphasizing, refuses to ask for help, focuses on what others think, denies weakness, denies pain, declares that failure is not an option, hides mistakes, insists on never quitting. When, near constant tendency to be self-referential, it's just some people are always absorbed in themselves. So in many cases, there have been times where I've done that, and I definitely will not deny that at all. The ability to commit to anything that doesn't serve their interests, that's, I see that as a good and a bad. You need to be able to commit to yourself of what you want, and you can't always commit to everything of what everybody else wants. But if you know that you want to do it, and they know that you can do it, then you know that you can serve that interest. Not everything is going to be something out of your interest that you want to do. And being able to voice that is super hard because some people don't want to say no. I'm a person that likes that. It's like I don't like saying no to people half the time. But then I understand that I've been giving myself too many things, too many times where I should have not done those things because it wasn't going to make me happy regardless. I've had to be able to make sure that I can find that balance. Having an exaggerated view of your abilities, you need to be confident in yourself. That's one thing that I see as the good thing of that, is that you do need to be able to be confident in yourself, but you can't be cocky. You can be cocky. It's always this sense of being able to make sure that you are confident in yourself. So, use that for your own discernment. I want to make sure that I'm confident in the abilities that I present to other people. I want to make sure that I am confident in my abilities and my actual skills that I can do. If I can't do something, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to tell you, like, hey, I don't got experience in this, but I have at least a good sense of what I know of what is going on, or at least of what I am doing. Lack of personal accountability, that's just something that people need to go through on their own pace. Having to understand that being accountable is you taking the big step for yourself of knowing that you screwed up, that you know that you can change those things, or that you should change them. That's just for how things are for certain people. I've had to make sure that I take a lot of personal accountability for the things that I really did do to hurt people, the things that I did do even to my family for what I was making, that I was being a dumb kid or a dumb teenager. But, I didn't realize that until maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, how even I treated most of my siblings, or anything like that. Like, I needed to make sure that I could take accountability for that I knew that I could at least do something better about it. And the difficulty emphasizing, like I said, I'm a pretty understanding person. It's hard to be able to understand people, but being able to understand people and listen is probably something that most people will develop at their own pace. And people do develop at their own pace. Refusing to ask for help. Not everybody wants to ask for help. I'm the same way like that. I'm very egotistical like that, where it's just like, no, don't help me. I need to be able to know that I can do this on myself, by myself, for myself. And I think that's kind of what it comes to the point to where that can be a bad thing, is because people see you struggling and you just are like, no, I'd rather just struggle, where they might help you kind of ease that struggle. They might help you ease that of stress or anything that you're going through, just so that they can help you, and that's just something that I really had to make sure that I can do for myself, is always know that it's okay to ask for help. Even on my sad days, my dark days, I need to be able to ask people for help, and even know that I have a support system that I can lean on. Focusing on what others think, that, yeah, I do that. Especially even in some of the negative manners, I have focused on what a lot of other people think, even for the negative, and then it just eats at me. It got to me. There's been a lot of things where that really, I do focus on what others think, but I'm not. But then it also comes to the point to where sometimes I'm not really focusing on the good things of what other people are thinking of me, and what I should be able to be seeing for myself, what I should be able to know that I can be confident about some of the things that I am doing, or that I can trust people, that I know that I can feel safe with some people. Not everybody is going to give you that same feeling, but you will know for what it feels like to make sure that you can actually focus on what people think and just be like, it's not really serving me right now. Am I that same person that I was before? No. If you are, then you know that you can change it. You can. That's the difference that I can find in that. Denies weakness. Nobody really wants to deny that they're really weak at something, especially for me. Like, I don't want to deny that I can't do something, or that I'm not strong enough to do it, but also to know that there are some times where everybody has those points where they're not feeling like they can do that. I have that feeling too. It's just something that everybody kind of goes through. Denying pain, I think, is just kind of to the point to where you're denying your emotions. If you feel hurt, but yet you just don't want it to accept it, then it's going to cause you more hurt. It's going to cause you more stress. I've denied that too, to where some people have hurt me, and I just let them. There are times to where the point to where I've really given up on the point to where I don't want to deny it, but it's because I still want to make them happy. It's just because that people pleasing really does that to when it comes to denying pain, and declares that failure isn't an option. That's it really just comes to the point of how much ambition you have. I, for myself, don't really declare that failure isn't an option because it can't be. There are some things that you should know that when you have been defeated, you are defeated. But knowing that you can always learn from your failures as a lesson and learn from them, and then instead of always constantly thinking like, yep, I that happened, I can't fix it, I can't do anything about it, but you can learn from it. It's pretty much to the point of where it's like a sense of strategic battle for yourself, of having to know that just because you failed or you screwed up doesn't mean that you still can't learn from it and be better. You can. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And hides mistakes. Nobody wants to show people that they fucked up. I mean, some people will take accountability for that, but when you make a mistake and they hide it and they don't really want to voice it, I've done that too. I mean, who hasn't? There have been many mistakes that I've made that I just don't want people to know about, but I mean, I've been having to make sure that when people might ask for me, of like, they know that I made that mistake, you got to own up to it. You really have to. It comes to that point to where you really just kind of have to own up to what your mistakes were. And if it was a failure, you turn it into a lesson. Learn from it and be better. Insist on never quitting is the same thing as I feel as failure is an option. Just because that you failed does not mean that you should give up. But there are points in time where you do need to understand to just leave things alone. There are points of that time in my life where I've even had to understand that I do need to leave some things alone. I do need to understand that I know that I can do what I want to do and then not have to think that I need to constantly put work into something that's not going to work out. I mean, it really just depends on what the situation is. It depends for everybody of what that might entail. And so leading to that, is the unhealthy ego states. Selfish, people pleaser, an enabler, rebellious, master manipulator, and critical. When I was reading these states, I kind of was thinking about the teenage years. We do kind of go to a point when we are teenagers, we are kind of almost all 6 of these. We try to make sure that we are selfish. We try to make sure that we are a people pleaser, but it's mostly for the people that we care about. That we are an enabler. Sometimes we do enable people to do stupid things, but then we realize that we shouldn't have done that. And I mean, everybody's kind of gone through that at some point. Same thing with being selfish. I've been selfish. Everybody has been selfish in some way, shape, or form. But it's not always bad to be selfish sometimes. Sometimes being selfish is for your own good, so that you know that you can be happy. It just really depends on what people really want to understand for themselves. And being rebellious, you got to take risks sometimes. If you're not a risk taker, how you know that it's not going to work out? I mean, it can be unhealthy when you're constantly taking risks, but you're not learning the lessons, or you're going through these same cycles over and over and over again, to where you're just constantly going to take those risks because it might be different. I mean, sometimes you just got to throw in the towel, insist on never quitting. The rebellious ego state kind of goes hand in hand with that, I feel. And the master manipulator, people manipulate even if you are egotistical or narcissistic, or even if you aren't either actually a narcissist or an egotistical. I mean, everybody's a manipulator in some way to be able to make sure that they can manipulate the situation in their favor. And I feel like that's just because we're humans. We are greedy, but that's just because that we want to make sure that everything goes in our favor for our life. You have to find that balance of what you know that you can manipulate in your favor, and not just being a manipulator just so that you get it in your favor and that it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. Use that discernment, find that balance. And everybody's critical. Everybody's going to be critical about you. You can't be critical on yourself all the time. You can't be critical on everybody else just because they did something that you didn't like. This because that they did something that hurt you does not mean that you always have to be critical. If you forgive somebody, you forgive them. But don't be constantly throwing in that crap of where it's like, I forgave you, but I'm still angry at you. Like, no, you can't do that. You either forgive me or you don't forgive me. You either make sure that you can let go of it, or you're just constantly going to be drinking that poison. I seen a video on that, and I thought that was very, very, very informational about that. So when it comes to like a lack of ego destroys relationships, leads to feelings of rejection, unworthiness, which can lead to possessiveness of our partners and unhealthy attachments in our relationships, platonic or romantic. In addition, when we can't express self-love, we tend to take on ego's favorite show-stopping role, that of a martyr. We are always going to be the victimizer. the lack of ego will probably definitely do that. We're going to be constantly throwing that victim mentality into where it's all about you, about how you feel and what you did, but then you're not really going to be taking it to the point of where how you might be making that person feel, how you might make that situation turn out into a lot worse just because you were playing the victimizer. Everybody's a victim. Everybody. There's always something that people have gone through, but I don't really think it really needs to come to a point to where you need to be constantly victimizing yourself or making somebody else feel like a consistent victim at all times. And then there's the weak ego, and this is something that I definitely felt because I felt like as a kid I had a weak ego to where I make sure that I actually couldn't, make sure that I couldn't propel myself to how I wanted to be, of finding that healthy ego, because I believe that there is such thing as a healthy ego. There is a healthy balance of what you can define between narcissism and egotistical. There is that balance. Not everybody's going to agree with me on that, but that's fine. But when it comes to that weak ego that I know that I definitely had, it needed to come to the point to where I do need to be able to make sure that I can have a healthy ego and make some of these habits of narcissism are something that I could use for my own self-love, but not to where I constantly need to be projecting it onto people, or even some of the more negative ones where I need to be projecting it on myself. A weak ego, impulsive or immaculate behavior, sense of inferiority or inferiority complex, fragile sense of identity, unstable emotionability, and excessive vulnerability. When it comes to the fragile sense of identity, nobody knows what they want to do or who they are. Nobody knows about what they want to do for themselves until they actually find it. And the weak ego, especially if you have had a weak ego or still do, being able to make sure that you can find your own sense of identity is something that a lot of people will take their whole lifetime being able to figure out what it is. Being able to understand of who they are and what they are, and even regardless of what they've done, that they can still be who they are and be better for themselves. An unstable emotionality, not everybody can control their emotions. There are times where I feel like I can't even control my emotions because I feel like the anger is just all of a sudden building up, or to a point to where it's like all of a sudden sadness just hits me and I'm just like sad, but I've been able to have to make sure that I can find that balance. Like, you need to be able to feel your emotions. And I feel like that is something that with the unstable emotionability is to be able to know that you can feel your emotions at all times. You need to feel them, acknowledge them, and how you can be able to move on past that. It's kind of the same thing when I feel like if you need to decide, like, are you going to be happy today or are you going to be sad today? You can make the decision. You have to decide for yourself of how you feel as an emotion. Like, you can make sure that you can talk yourself out of constantly being angry, but you also need to make sure that you can forgive and forget. That's to the point of where that comes to the point of being critical or rebellious. Like, you need to be able to forgive and forget. And excessive vulnerability, some people will, and even me, be vulnerable at all times. They're going to feel vulnerable. They're going to feel like they have no shield to put up or no armor to be able to put over themselves. But there is to a point to where you need to be able to find the situations when you can be vulnerable at all times. There are times where you don't need to be vulnerable. There are times where you do need to be vulnerable. And I feel people will know of when they need to. I definitely know now of when I need to be vulnerable and when I don't need to be vulnerable, so that I don't have that sense of where I feel like I'm going to constantly get hurt all the time, because it hurts. Hurt is always going to happen. It's the same thing with pain. Pain always happens. There's always something that hurts us. There's always something that's going to feel like a pain in our heart or in our chest or anything like that. So being able to find that balance is the best that you can really do for yourself. And I've done my best to be able to find that balance for myself. So when we experience trauma or fail to have emotional needs met as a child, perception of reality and self can be distorted. Even when we're going through these things as a child, it is hard to be able to find that perception of reality and self. When we go through some very traumatic experiences as children, or even at our most hormonal state of teenagers or anything like that, especially since kids are hitting, puberty at such a younger age now, that the perception of reality and self can be distorted. That's all I got to say is oof. Being able to find that you need to be able to perceive of what you see, regardless of what is going on around you, does not always mean that it's going to affect you. Like, it does affect you, but you got to find that own way of discerning of what is and what isn't going to affect you. So being able to make sure that you can have that good perception of what you can absorb at all times, making sure that you can love yourself at all times, no matter even if when you fuck up or when you screw up, that you can be better. It's gonna make sure that you can help with that distortion. And I've had to find that good balance too, because I've absorbed a lot of shit as a kid. I absorbed a lot of other people's problems, and I had to project them on because I always had to compare myself to others about what they were going through and how they were doing it. And then it kind of screwed me to the point to where I had to be able to find that balance of where I'm like, no, I can't relate to this. I can't understand this because I'm not going through it, but I can understand of what you are going through because you are experiencing it. So, yeah. So, to finish it all off is the difference. Narcissists, more often than not, tend to be in love or attracted to oneself and sometimes indifferent towards the plight of others. Egoists are people who enhance favorable views of themselves. They place themselves as the center of the world regardless of others, and egotism exploits the sympathy and ignorance of others. So, with confidence is to have faith in your own abilities and believe in yourself. Ego is entirely different. Unlike confidence, ego operates out of self-interest. It seeks approval, accolades, and validation at all costs in order to be seen as right. Now, that last part is really what kind of caught my attention, because everybody seeks approval. Everybody always wants to make sure that they can have their parents' approval, their friends' approval, their people that they're constantly around, even their significant others' approval at all times. Making sure that you can constantly seek the accolades of where, like, I've done this, here you are, what are you going to do about it? Or how can you make sure that you can pipe up next to it, or maybe be able to make sure that you can relate to it? And it's just something that we're constantly always trying to have that. And then the validation is the biggest thing that I definitely felt, because I do like a lot of validation. But then I've also seen it's where my constant seeking of validation became to a point to where it causes pain in others. It causes pain in myself to constantly have to seek that validation when I should be able to find that validation in myself. I should be able to give myself the validation that I can do the things that I want to do, and I don't have to have the approval from others or seek the validation from others that I can or can't do it. Some people are going to be proud of you. They will tell you that they're proud of you. They're going to tell you that you've done an exceptional job of being able to be better or change for your betterment or anything like that. But I mean, when we're constantly seeking for these things, we are seeking the things that we don't even want to hear, the negative limitations, the negative ways of thinking, the things that are projected onto us. And that's the full circle of what happens with constantly being able to have to seek validation from others. So, we're always going to get it. There's always going to be a time where we're not going to have negative things projected onto us at all times. And that's just to the point to where you got to understand that you can have your own validation about that, and that you can do whatever anybody tells you, that you can do it. If you want to change, you can change. Not everybody's going to see it, but that's okay. Not everybody's going to see it as the same as you do, but that's okay. You got to be able to make sure that you can give your sense of validation and celebrate when you do the things that you are proud of. And, it's hard to be able to kind of celebrate the little accomplishments, but you do need to be able to celebrate those little tiny things sometimes. And it'll give you a good sense of gratitude of being able to do that. And gratitude is the one thing that I really had to make sure that can counteract my validation, is just being grateful for, what I have, what is being presented to me, even either good or bad, and just being able to find that balance. So I hope everybody kind of had a good, reflection on this. This was really hard to kind of, for me, I felt anyway. But I mean, I wasn't anyway to the point of thinking where I couldn't do this. It's just, this is everywhere. And that's kind of the whole thing when it comes to narcissism and ego. It's just, it is everywhere. There's so much that somebody can really have on oneself that is just freaking crazy, to having to make sure that you can find the balance. Like I said, just because you have some of these habits and you have some of these traits does not make you narcissistic or egotistical. Everybody has these traits. You do need them sometimes if you have a weak ego, or you've constantly been putting yourself down, or where you've never seen yourself in a better way about how you've been able to look at these things. But you also got to make sure that it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. It doesn't. I mean, you can stress on that as much as you want, but you always got to make sure that you look at the good things of what people are telling you than constantly looking at yourselves at the bad, because nobody's going to understand it just as much as you do. So I hope you guys like this. Like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you guys soon.